So today we're doing a tier list of self-defense techniques. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to my channel, Fighting Words, the Martial Arts Library. On this channel I review martial arts books and I talk about other martial arts related subjects. So today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be creating a tier list of a baker's dozen worth of self-defense techniques that I've found in various instructionals, whether they be books or videos or even some online stuff. So taking a look at some of the more common ones, and I'm going to be rating them on various factors like whether this is an easy technique to pull off or not, or the likelihood of one injuring oneself while attempting this technique. We're also going to take into consideration whether or not you could easily justify using this technique in court, because the fight after the fight isn't really talked about enough. So we're starting off with one of the penultimate techniques that you see in a lot of these instructionals and things that people will think will end a fight instantly, and that is the eye gouge. Whether or not we're talking more of the spear hand variety with the fingers rigid, or having the fingers splayed out in the hopes of getting them into either eye socket. I'm probably going to surprise you guys by not rating this particularly highly. If you're using this technique at a distance, you are using a rather small weapon on a very small target. I think the likelihood of hitting it isn't as great as some of the other techniques that have been listed here. I think that you have two realistic reactions to being struck in the eye socket with the fingers, and one of those is going to be to sort of like do that and then continue with your attack. And the other is to actually suffer some catastrophic damage to the eye and perhaps not be able to continue. But again, having to justify that in court means that it's only going to be suitable for life and death situations. And I think there's also a chance, especially with the more rigid fingered version, that you could strike perhaps like the bones of the forehead and injure your own fingers, which would make continuing to fight after that point much more difficult. So taking all those things into consideration, I'm going to put this in D tier. Up next is the palm strike, and at this point we're going straight centerline strikes with the heel of the palm. Now the likelihood of injury with one of these is pretty low. Bas Rutten, who's mixed martial arts fighter famous for his time in pankration, has talked about in one of his books that he did injure himself attempting a palm strike, but it was an impact on the top of the hand instead of the palm itself. So I think that the likelihood of self-injury using this technique is pretty low. To outside observers, it tends to look more peaceful than closed fists or clawing hands or anything like that. We're just smacking the guy in the face, right? And again, if you need to justify this in court, no, I wasn't trying to hit him, I was trying to push him away. So taking all those things into consideration, I'm actually going to stack this at S tier. You can primarily aim for the high line, aiming for the head, which could cause unconsciousness and take the guy out of the fight. You could also use it to the body to help off balance them. So I think it has quite a lot of utility and a low risk of injury, or anyone saying that you are not justified in using it. Up next is the side kick to the knee. This one I think is suitable for certain circumstances. It bothers me when I see people showing it to counter an attack to the front, where you have to twist your own body to throw that kick. It's great if someone's coming into the side. Although, as with all kicks, it leaves you on one leg. If you don't time it right, if you don't have enough force going into it from your side, you could wind up basically bouncing off of the guy and losing your balance. Although, thankfully, because the kick is kept low, there's a smaller chance of that. I think the likelihood of inverting someone's knee or causing enough damage to the knee to prevent them from continuing their attack is pretty low. But I do think it is suitable for stopping someone who's trying to rush in on you and sort of maintaining a certain distance. Again, I think it's pretty easy to justify in that respect. But I do have some concerns about it. Again, turning your body toward the attack, perhaps exposing your flank, and also being on one leg. So I'm going to put it at B tier. Up next is a forward elbow strike. Boom. So I like this one for a lot of reasons. Like, the likelihood of self-injury is very low. It is possible, if you do get a clear shot of landing this strike and causing, like a one-hitter quitter, the guy just goes out, fight's over. I think the disadvantage is that the range you need to throw this strike needs to be very in close, but not like chest-to-chest close, not really in that sort of clinch. It is by itself sort of non-lethal, so I would like to think that being able to justify its use in a court of law would be pretty simple. However, I can also see perhaps an untrained jury seeing it as being a particularly barbaric technique. Taking those things into consideration, this is going to sit at C tier. Up next is a very specialized technique, the yoke hand strike. So that's striking with the web of the hand into the throat. Now, this is a very circumstantial technique. It's really only justified in lethal force situations. It's not going to come up in many other situations that you might find yourself in. I think there is a chance of self-injury if you don't go in at the right angle. You might wind up injuring your thumb, which would make it difficult to continue to grip if you need to attach to the opponent. I don't think it would be a difficult shot to land, but I do wonder how effective it would be on its own. Like, I've been hit in the throat a couple of times, and I've seen people get hit and, double over. I've also personally experienced, like, that sure is pretty uncomfortable, but it's not stopping me from doing anything. So as with all impact tools, the fact that we have bodies moving through the air means that you're not going to get the perfect strike every time. So because of all those, I'm actually going to put it at F tier. Not a big fan. Knee to the groin. This is a classic self-defense technique, whether we're talking things like World War II combatives or defense against sexual assault. I think it's not great as a finishing tool necessarily. We see it especially in movies, where someone gets kneed in the groin and then they double over and the fight's over. The thing is, it relies mostly on causing pain. And again, in the chaos of a fight, you're not going to get the perfect shot. However, I think it could be used well to help set up other strikes, like, taking away the attacker's focus to what's going on with the upper body tools. So, knee to the groin, followed by an elbow, or a hammer fist, or something else. I think it could also be used, we're talking about the groin, but maybe being used to affect the center of gravity, the hips, which could off-balance the opponent, which could upset their ability to attack. So even though I'm not a big fan of it as a finishing technique, I do like it as a good in-close weapon that can be used to augment other aspects of the fight. I'm debating on putting this in C, but I think I'm going to put it at B just because if you're in close, it's almost always available. The rear choke, or Hadakajime, or Mataliao. Here's the thing. As a fight ender, chokes are practically unparalleled. If someone's unconscious, the fight's over. They cannot exact violence against you. Because this is meant to be used from the rear, you need to find a way to get there, and it's not always going to be readily available. There are also some questions about whether or not it would be justified to use something which could be potentially lethal. I actually had jury duty in the state of Georgia a few years ago, and the person on trial, among other things, was being charged with aggravated assault, and it was his use of a choking technique that turned it into aggravated assault instead of standard assault. So that's something to keep in mind when using techniques like this. So taking all that into consideration, no matter how much I love it as a guaranteed fight ender, the fact that it may be difficult to get into that position, and the fact that a jury of 12 may not look on it too fondly, means that, unfortunately, I have to put this at C tier. Snap kick to the groin. This is another favorite of self-defense techniques. As I covered before, groin strikes are basically used to cause pain. Pain is not a reliable method of stopping a fight. It might, it also might not. This also carries with it some of the same issues as the low side kick, in that you are on one foot. This carries a few more issues because you're going to have to raise your foot higher up than you would for a side kick to the knee. That would compromise your balance even further. Unlike with the knee strikes to the groin, this one isn't always readily available. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to just stick this one at F tier. It just seems like a lot of risk for not a whole lot of reward. Power slap. Believe it or not, this was on the scene before you had those crazy slap fighting competitions. The power slap has many of the same attributes as a palm strike, that you're hitting with a broad surface. You're not using your fist, which has a higher chance of causing injury to the hand. And again, open hand strikes tend to be viewed as less dangerous than closed fist strikes by observers. I think the biggest disadvantage with this is that because it comes from such a wide arc, it might be easily avoided or defended against. The way I have seen it recommended to be used is out of what's called a fence position, which is a pre-fight position where you get the guy's attention and then wham. So I'm going to stick this one at A tier. Like I said, I don't like the fact that it has to travel so long. It needs to sort of be cocked back, which is going to alert the person. But I think that you could throw multiples of these with very little risk of injury to oneself, with very little need to justify them in a court of law, and a high probability of at least putting your opponent on the back foot, if not causing fight-ending damage. Osotogari! Weirdly, this shows up in several self-defense manuals. Osotogari, which could also be a back heel trip or an outside reap, depending on the terminology you're using. This can be a very powerful throw if you can get the opponent set up for it well. In judo, there's a saying that it's the first throw you learn and the last one that you master. Part of that speaks to the amount of risk associated with this throw, because you need to step across your opponent's body in order to hit it. That might give them an opportunity to outflank you if you have not set it up properly by stunning your opponent and off-balancing them in the direction of the throw. And grappling attacks in general take longer than impact attacks. So, takes a higher level of skill, may not be a fight-ending technique, could possibly expose your flank. You might be able to throw the guy on the ground. I say that the cons outweigh the pros, no matter how much I like this technique. I think, unfortunately, this places it in D tier. Hammer fist. I like the hammer fist. It's one of those techniques I recommend everyone learns. There is a very low risk of self-injury with it. You might accidentally hit your wrist or a spot on your hand that's not as well protected as the meat of the hammer fist, but I think that that's less likely. The hammer fist itself can come from multiple angles. You can use it to strike out at someone behind you or off to the side. You can use it against someone in front of you. You can come in at an angle to the side. I'd say that its disadvantages are somewhat nebulous. It's not a punch, but it is a closed fist attack, which might not have the visual friendliness of an open hand strike. Because it comes at some odd angles, it might also not be the most natural technique to use. I'm going to go ahead and stick it in B tier. I think it has a lot of utility and a low chance of self-injury, and I think that makes up for a lot of its deficits. The foot stamp. So like stomping on someone's foot while you're in close. This is another one of those things that is pretty exclusively a pain technique, which is why I don't rate it particularly highly. I think at best it is a distraction. At worst, in order to set it up, you're going to be on one leg, and if you're being, pushed around, shoved around, it's going to be very difficult to pull that off. I don't think it's necessarily a high risk technique. I just don't think that there's going to be a whole lot of return on it, even though we do see it as a way to distract someone when you're in a bear hug or something. It's very hard for me not to just straight up put this in F tier. I'm going to say D, just because there are not a whole lot of risks associated with it, but I also don't think you're going to get a whole lot out of it. And finally, biting. Biting. I would recommend, if you can go for any other technique except for a bite, you use that technique. Often this is shown as a way to counter a form of grappling, like being held or pinned. The problem is, once again, it is a pain-reliant technique. Someone's got drugs coursing through their system, if they are under the influence of adrenaline, if they are simply a tough person, they will ignore that or not be able to feel it. As well, there's a tremendous risk, because if you do bite through flesh and get their blood into your system, whatever bloodborne disease they have, now you have it. In a life and death struggle, nothing is off the table. I just think that if a bite is your best weapon to use in any given situation, you probably don't have a whole lot of actual fighting skills. Because of that, I'm sticking this in F tier. The fact that you might sentence yourself to a lifetime of HIV or hepatitis because you don't know a better move, not a fan. So anyway, that's just one guy's opinion of the rankings of various self-defense techniques. I'm sure some of you disagree with me. Please let me know in the comments. Please give your own opinions. Let's turn this into a discussion. If you'd like to support the channel, or if you have any ideas for any other videos I should do, please consider donating to my Ko-fi account. I'm going to put a link of that in the description. And thank you for following along, and I'll see you later.